Hello everyone, my name is Lydia and welcome. Today we're going to be painting Private Lake Cove. I'll go over all the materials that you need to do the painting and we'll walk through the process step by step. Also, I'll list the materials needed for the painting in the description box down below this video. In addition, I'll provide a photo of the finished painting on my Instagram account, Lydia Pangborn Art. If you like this video, please hit the like button, and for those of you that have subscribed, thank you very much, and if you haven't subscribed, please consider doing so. So grab your paints, your brushes, and something to stay hydrated, and I'll meet you back at the easel. The materials we're going to need for this painting today are a 16 by 20 inch stretched and primed canvas. I have it turned in landscape proportions. I'm going to use an acrylic paints, and my colors on my palette are Alizarin Crimson, Yellow Ochre, sometimes called Yellow Oxide, Naples Yellow, Pthalo Green, and that's in the blue shade, Pthalo Blue, Burnt Umber, and Titanium White. The brushes I'm going to be using are a 2-inch flat brush, a 3/4 inch flat brush. You can go as high as an inch or more if you'd like. A filbert brush, and this one's a worn out filbert brush. And a small round brush, this happens to be a number 1 by Pro Stroke. You're going to want to have some water for rinsing your brushes, a paper towel or an old cloth for drying your brushes, a mister bottle for keeping your paints damp, and something to make some little dots on your canvas with, and this is a piece of kids chalk. As an option, you may want to have a ruler. We're going to start with our 2-inch flat brush, and we're just going to get a tone color on our canvas. And if you don't want to use titanium white, you can always use some gesso for this. But I'm going to wet my brush first and get a little dampness on my canvas. So I'm just dipping my paintbrush in some water just to get it wet, and I'm wiping off the excess. And I'm just going to take some of that water and brush across my canvas. And this is just so my paint moves a little easier across the canvas. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of my white paint, or gesso if you like, and I'm going to get a little bit of my Alizarin Crimson, and I'm just going to start to add that into my paint. I don't want it to be too dark. I'm going to press my bristles so that I pick up quite a bit of that paint. So I'm going to just go ahead and just put this up here, and it's probably not something that you're going to see too much of color-wise on video, but you can make this as dark as you want. If you want it to be a little darker, you certainly can. I'm just trying to get a nice light pink color on the canvas here. And once this is completely covered, I'm going to go ahead and let it dry, and then we'll come back and we'll start actually sketching on our drawing. So what I want to do is decide where my sky is, so from the top to where I want it to stop, and I'm going to have it about 7 inches from the top. So if you want to take your ruler, you certainly can do that, or you can just find the halfway point here, which is 8 inches on this side, and go up about 1 inch from there and estimate it. That's fine too. But if you're more of an exacting personality and you want to measure it down, you can certainly have your little ruler out. So here's why your ruler is optional. And you would do the same thing over on this side. Find that 7 inches. And give it a little mark there. So once you get your 2 lines drawn, you can work to connect them, but you don't have to connect this with a straight line. It's better not to really make one straight line anyway. You just want to make a few little guidelines And that way when you are working, it just becomes more natural. It has more of a natural look, and it just gives you an idea of where to stop. So I went up about 1.75 inches here, and I just made a little dot, and then I went up to about my 4-inch mark. So another 2.5 inches up from here, just so that I can I'm gonna make just a little triangle shape here. I want a little area of land that juts out, and you can certainly adjust this as you go. I may even have a few grasses down in there and a few grasses over here. Just want to have an idea because I want my sky to go from dark to light, and then from here, this is going to be my water, so I want it to reflect opposite. So I'm going to go from light to dark. What I've done is I've taken that same area that I was working in, and I've just added just a little drop of my blue into where I was already working. Now I'm going to get a little bit more water in this because I want this to flow, and I'm loading up my brush. So I had a really tiny, tiny drop of blue. I don't want it too dark, so maybe a little tiny drop of blue, and you just add that a little bit at a time to your white. And I'm going to come up here, and I'm just going to start to put my sky in at the top with just this blue. And if you feel like it's not moving across the canvas and you want to go ahead and give your canvas a little spritz from your mister bottle, you can do that. It'll help things flow a little better, blending in easier. All right. So as I work my way straight across from one side to the other, I'm just working to blend by making these long X strokes, and you certainly could do circles. You can get a little blender brush if you like. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up a little bit more white. I'm getting some more white. And I'm going to add just a hint. I didn't rinse my brush out. I'm going to go ahead and add a hint of my Alizarin Crimson and just mix that in. It's not going to be a whole lot. And I'm just going to come in, I want a little bit more white than that. So I'm going to do a little bit more white. I'm just going to come in and work that down right to this little line here and blend that back up into my sky. So I started below where I was, and then I started to work it along this bottom line and start to blend that back up. We're going to have a tree line along in here, so not to worry. Now here's where we were going to go down here, and we're going to have darker area from the light to the dark. So I'm going to pick up some of my white. So I've got some of my white on my brush. I'm going to blend it into some of that blue. I can add a little bit more of my Pthalo Blue if I like, and just start to work that in. Right up to that line. I'm going to leave a little gap there just below that line, just so I know where it is. And again, if you feel like you're not getting the blending that you want, you can either wet your brush a little more, or you can just mist your canvas so it blends a little easier. Just add in a drop more of that little Alizarin Crimson so it reflects this layer here. There we go. I felt like it wasn't crimson enough. I had lost some of that crimson color. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add blue a little more. So as I'm coming down, I'm getting a little darker down here. So it's like we took this and folded it over. So this bottom area is a little darker. I'm going to pick up some blue, but I'm also going to pick up a little bit more of that white. I want to mix that in there with it. There we go. And this is just our beginning layer And once we have this the way that we like it, and again, I'm gonna make this, I'm gonna go from right to left to make sure that this blends in and has a nice smooth look, because this is gonna be a nice, for the most part, a nice smooth looking lake and a nice calm looking sky. So once we have this the way we like it, we're gonna rinse this brush out, get all the paint out of this brush, put it away, and then we're gonna move on to the next step. Now what we wanna do is decide where we want things to be in the rest of our painting. So we want this to feel like a nice, cozy cove. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna have trees along the back edge here, and I think I'm gonna have them go from a nice taller bank, working down maybe some different levels and coming down until it angles down to a shorter bank. And then I'm gonna have some clouds maybe moving in this direction. So some trees here, maybe along in here. And doesn't have to be exact. We wanna know just maybe about where they are. I'm gonna make it just a little smaller as we go down. So maybe a little taller, a few little bumps up, and then a little shorter there. And then I'm gonna have some clouds up here, and we'll work with that in a little while. And maybe a tree that breaks our little line back here. So maybe a taller little bushy looking tree along in here, all our grasses here, and maybe a few little grasses over here eventually. I'm gonna use my 1-inch flat brush for that. I'm gonna go ahead and get some water on it. Wipe off any of the excess. Now things in the back are usually a little cooler. So I'm gonna come in and I'm going to grab some of my titanium white, and I'm gonna get a little bit of my green. And I'm just gonna go right here and just mix that in just to see what it looks like. I'm gonna add a little red to that, just to take it back. I don't want it really, really bright green. And we add a little bit more of the green in there. So we're looking for mostly green color, but it's really soft. Let's see what that looks like. All right, I'm liking that. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm going to, with my flat brush, just make little taps back here. And I'm gonna keep these toward the top of my sketch. Sometimes I may turn my brush flat, sometimes I may turn it on its side. Just depends on what I want it to look like. And this again is just our first little layer. And we're just gonna work this all the way across, making variations in our painting. So we may want some of it to be shorter, some of it to be taller. It's just a nice soft color on this first layer. And I'm keeping it mostly toward the top of my sketch. And then what I'm gonna do is I want it to be a little bit more, this next layer down below, a little bit more bold. There's a little bit more pigment in it. So I'm gonna come back, I'm gonna get a little bit more of my green, and this time I'm gonna add some of my Pthalo Blue to that. I'm gonna get a little white. And I want it to have a bit more of a green to it, so I'm gonna pick up just a drop of my yellow ochre and mix that in. And let's see what that looks like. I'm liking that. I'm gonna put a little red in it, just a drop of my red, because that takes that and mutes it just a little more. There we go. And we're gonna do the same thing. So this is gonna bring this color closer to us. And I'm gonna vary it, maybe take some of it over what I just did. And maybe some of it I'll bring down and below a little bit. And this is just our first layer. And again, I'm varying my heights in all of this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back in, and now I'm going to add a drop of my umber to this. And it's just a little bit of that umber, and we're going to put that in. So I have 3 separate layers. One that's a very pale pigmented color, one that's a little bit more in the middle, and as I'm moving forward, I just warmed it up a little bit so this looks a little closer to us. And we will be adding a little bit more colors to this in a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this color and I'm going to brush it at the base here where I have that vacant area. And I'm going to get a little water on my brush and sweep that across. So this is just our first little coating back here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and fill in this front area. So I want this to be very bold, so I'm going to get my green and my blue. And my yellow ochre. And I'm just going to start putting that in, and I'm going to even put in some of this brown and mix that in so that umber, make it really dark. And again, sometimes I'm going flat with my brush, sometimes I'm going to turn it on its edge. And at the very bottom, I'm just going to come in and with the paint that's left on my brush, scrape that around this little area to create a nice little soft area where it may be sitting down in the water a little more. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and fill my tree in so we have a complete road map of where we want everything. So I'm going to come back to my blue and my green. A little bit of this warmer yellow, and I'm just going to go ahead and start in the middle of my tree, work it up as high as I want it, so now I know how I want it, and then I'm going to start to fill that in. So we're just filling in our little blocks of color on the edge of my tree. I want it to be a little softer. May even add just a little bit more titanium white to that. Get that in. So this is our road map, and everything looks a little crazy and messy and not quite where we want it yet color wise, but now we know where we're going. So we're going to rinse this brush out, let everything dry, and we'll come back for the next step. So we're going to start putting in our clouds. I'm going to use my worn out little filbert brush here, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to mix up, starting with a base color of a little bit of Alizarin Crimson, a little bit of Naples Yellow mixed in with my white. So I do have a pretty dry brush. There may be a little bit of tiny bit of dampness in my brush. So I'm going to come in, get my white, and I'm going to get just a tiniest bit of my Alizarin Crimson, put it in there, mix that in, get a little more white, and then I'm going to get the tiniest bit of my Naples Yellow. Put that in. And then we'll see where we are I'm trying to create a nice, really soft peach color. And I'm gonna add a drop of water to this. Mix that in. So I want it, the paint itself, I want it to be able to come off my brush easily. And a little more white, but I don't want too much paint on my brush. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try to offload some of that, and I'm gonna wipe some of this paint. I'm wiping some of that paint out of my brush. And I'm gonna come in and just decide, I think I'm gonna have my first little bank of clouds start a little lower. It's right here. And I'm making really tight, small movements on my canvas. And this is just the first layer. And once my paint is off one side of the brush, notice I flipped it over and started working on the other. At the base of your cloud, you definitely want to go across to soften it. So that's a little bank of clouds kind of angling slightly up. So I'm going to come back and get some more paint on my brush. And maybe the next one, I'm going to start here. Maybe I'll have a little trail leading back to that cloud slightly. Take this up a little higher. Come back, get some more paint. I don't have a lot of paint on my brush. I'm moving over, taking this little bit up off the canvas a little bit. And I'm working mostly in the middle here as we come back and add a bit more smaller wispy clouds later on down in this area. So we're going to keep getting some clouds up here until you get them the way that you want them. And when we go back and put some of the white highlights on, we can split them up the way we want to even more then. So we'll have another layer of clouds to do at that point as well. All right, so I'm gonna leave it at that. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come back in and start to warm up this area back here just a little bit. I'm gonna continue to work with my filbert brush. So as I mix my paint with my filbert brush, I'm bringing in some of the Pthalo Blue and Pthalo Green together. Just like it's back here already, I'm going to add some white to that and see where I am. Then I'm going to add a drop of my Alizarin Crimson. A little bit more than that. And even a little tiny bit of the Umber. Let's see what that looks like. And I'm going to go to my little base area here. And I'm going to add a few darker areas to this very front area. I'm going to add just a little bit more white to that. There we go. And I'm going to start to work in a little bit more of just the blue down at the bottom of this area. So I'm just working in some darks and some lights, but as I work over, I'm just going to take little tip on the tip of my brush. I'm getting a little bit of that blue, and I'm just going to start to work that into the bottom, just to add some shadows at the base of everything. And once I get that across part of the way, I'm just going to take a little light touch and just start to feather that down a little bit with just this nice back and forth scrubbing motion on my canvas. And then I'll keep working that way across. So I'll come back to my little mixture that I made, and I'll come in, work it across, maybe add a little bit of this blue in there to get some light and dark areas, and then slowly feather that over. And I'm just going to keep working that way all the way across, just systematically. My mixture, and then a little bit of the blue at the base. And if you get too much blue, you can work it back across. Keep working that over. Come back and mix in to the first color and then just lightly scumble that across. Just scraping it in this nice horizontal motion across your canvas. So you can still see some of those lighter areas in the background. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit. I didn't rinse my brush out. I'm picking up some of my Naples Yellow. I'm coming off to the side of that color. And I had mixed up with the blue, green, about equal amounts, a touch of the alizarin, and a touch of the umber. That's this pile. And then I was slowly working in to the blue, and now I'm adding some Naples Yellow in that same pile. And I'm going to get a little bit of titanium white. And then I'm going to come back and maybe hit some areas at the top of that area that I just did with some of those yellows. And I'm just touching in some places all the way across. And I can even take some of that that's left on my brush, and I'm going to start to, I'm going to get my brush a little wet. I'm not taking that paint out. I'm going to pull in some white to that, and it's quite wet. And I'm just going to start to move that. I'm going to wipe some of that paint out and just wipe that out. So you don't want too much paint on your brush when you're going to bring this down a little bit. And I'm going to bring in some white and start to work that in. So now what I can do is, as I'm bringing in a little white, I'm going to create a shadow on my water that mimics some of the shape of what's up here. So trying to keep in mind similar shapes along the way. I'm going to pick up a little drop more white, just a little bit, and just work that across. And it starts to look like the reflection of everything that I just put in. So this is step 2, and I'm going to pick up a little bit of white, and I'm going to get a little bit more water on my brush. And I just want to soften that a little bit. So a little bit more white, making it a little wet. And just bringing it back in here to soften. And we're going to come more to the front now. And I'm going to go a little softer here. The edges. Just want to feather those edges out just a little more. Here we go. And I know it looks really dark right now, but we are going to work on the water a little more. But what I'm going to do first is come to the front here and get this area nice and warmed up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this brush, my filbert brush, and I'm going to take some of this umber. I got quite a bit of it, and I'm going to mix it into this mix that I have. So now I'm really starting to warm that mix up. I'm going to add a little bit more of my yellow ochre, and it becomes a very deep, rich green here. And I'm just going to start to work that in, and I'm just making short, choppy strokes. And wherever I feel like maybe there's some areas that have thin paint on them, I can start to work that in. And I'm going to start to scrape some of that across the canvas down here. And I want a little area that's going to have a little grasses down right in here, so I'm going to put some down there as well. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to my Naples Yellow, and I'm going to go off to the side, and then a little bit of my titanium white. That same color, just added a little Naples Yellow and white, and I'm going to start to come in and hit that in here as well. So I'm just creating nice random areas of lights and darks, and these are just the base color again. So we're starting to warm up some of that vibrant turquoise that we put in. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to take just some of my blue now, and I can pull it down into this mix. And I want a little area of darkness right here, as though my tree might be casting some sort of shadow across the little island of land, this little piece of land we have here. So just a little bit of that blue mixed in there, just to darken it into this nice, vibrant blue color. And I'm going to take some more of that blue, and I'm going to, so it's mixed into this little mixture, and I'm just going to work that a little bit into my center there. Then I'm going to reach down, I'm going to grab a little red right into that same area. Get a little white. So it's a nice purple gray color, and I'm just going to start to hit that in to some places. So I'm not working with my brightest brights yet. I'm just starting to create some of the areas of light and dark with these warm, but still kind of muted colors. Some of these colors are a mix of mixing the brown in warms it up just a little bit, but it's not completely the nice, deepest highlights we want yet. And while I have this green color here, I am going to go ahead and put a little bit of that paint. I'm just going to scumble some of that in down at the base over here and just pull it up. So I do want a little area over here that's going to have some grasses in it. Take some of this yellow, and I'm going to start to work that into that. So I worked it into this area that has my mix of blue, green, hint of red, hint of umber, and then I had pulled it over, added some yellow. So now I'm going to add a little bit more yellow to that and just start to work that in. And I'm going to keep most of this yellow over to this side of my tree because it's going to give it a nice bright look over here. And then I'm going to take some of my blue again, just the blue, and just start to work that into the center, mixing it in with some of those yellows, those brightest yellows. I'm going to get a little bit more of that blue down in here. And you can start to see how I'm going to take some of that blue and put it in here just a little bit. You can start to see how we're just adding layers at a time to create the areas of light and dark where we want. And as this is drying now, I can come back and start to work again. I like to work in layers from back to front. It's just my favorite thing to do. You certainly can work in any other way that you would like. I feel like there's just a straight line right here, so I'm going to get a little bit of my blue. And this is a time just to look and see, are there areas that you would prefer to make look a little different? Just grabbing just a little bit of the blue. And I'm just going to hit that in back here to create a little bit more nice, vibrant texture over here. And I can hit some of that blue again down in here. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get all the paint out of the brush. We're still going to be using this brush so that we can go ahead and finish getting those highlights on our clouds. And if there's any other areas in the sky we want to work on, we're going to go ahead and finish that up. Okay, so once this area is dry, we can go ahead and put the very top parts that make the clouds look like they have volume on. So I'm going to use just mostly the white paint on the tip of my brush, and my brush is dry. I got all the paint out from before, and it is dry, and I'm going to dip straight down into my little white paint here, and I'm going to come and I'm just going to put my brush down. So if I want this to be my cloud and this is the bottom part of my cloud, I want this to be the top, so I'm just going to put this right at the top, and then I'm just going to start to make little very tight, small, round motions just like that. And I don't have any other color but the white in here. You could do another layer of like a softer yellow and then do your white if you'd like. So I got just the paint dipped down into my white, and you don't want too much paint. I got a little bit on each side. And put it down and just start wiggling my brush around. I can come, if I get a little clumpy, I can come right up under that clump And just kind of soften it out a little bit if I need to. And as I get less paint on my brush, less of that white, I can come underneath and just soften down at the base. So again, I'm going to dip down, straight down into my paint. I can wipe some of it off if I get too much. And I'm going to come here and just keep working. I really like doing clouds like this. It's just really fun, and I love how random it is. So I'm going to go ahead, boop, just put it down. And if making the boop sound helps when you put it down, go ahead and do that as well. And put it down. So now you can see how your clouds are starting to take a little shape. And if you want to soften them out at the base of them, you can. But you've got some of the blues up above, a little bit of the blue still showing through here, and you've got that nice light yellow color that you put in, that kind of peachy color that you mixed up. And then I'm going to start moving across the same way. Another thing you can think about is if you have some white paint on your brush and you want to start to bring some of that down into this lower area here, you can start to, it'll release some of, like here, a little bit of that paint off your brush, and here you'll get these little tiny little, possibly smaller clouds that look like, because they're small, off in the distance. So once you get the clouds the way that you want them, you have the sky looking the way that you like, we're going to go ahead and start to work down to just add a little bit more warmth to the back tree area, and then we're going to work on our water before we finish up the very foreground. So I'm still working with my filbert brush. This is my little workhorse today, and I'm going to take a little bit of my yellow ochre and I'm going to bring it over to this little pile we've been working in. So it's these little yellow ochre, and I'll pull in some white, and it's a little phthalo blue and green already in there with a little of the umber and the red in there. So it's that same pile, and I'm just going to go in here and maybe hit a few areas of this color, and I'm just going to touch it in, and you can use your finger if you have a small brush. And you want to do a little bit of blending. I just like to take my finger and rub it, and I'm going to try to hit it on areas. So I know that my shadow for the tree is casting across here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to make it seem as though it's hitting on mostly on the side of the trees that would be facing more of the light coming from this side of my canvas. And it doesn't necessarily have to. You can have some dispersed light hitting as well. And I'm just going to stay more in that middle ground with this. I don't want to take out a lot of my nice dark areas that I have that are down closer to the water. But I do want to hit some of this, and I may even take it to that middle area just a little bit. And I'm just tapping with the very tip of my brush. I have that paint just on the very tip, and I'm going straight into and just hitting it. There we go. And I'm going to take just a little bit of this. I'm not going to rinse out my brush. Just come pick up just a tad bit of that blue. Just get a hint of the red and put in with it. And just come in and maybe hit some little dark areas back here that down at the base. Now this is more at the bottom because it would be more as though the bottom of the trees, there would be heavier woods. And when you're adding that blue and red together, creates more of a nice little purple color to create some shadow. There we go. All right, so I'm going to leave that for now. We may hit a few other little bright colors back there in just a little while once we work on the front, but that's pretty much done, but with a few maybe hits here and there once we do our little final touches. So I'm rinsing this brush out. I'm going to get all the paint out of this brush, and we're going to come back for our next step and start to work on finishing up our water to move forward. Okay, so for this next step, you want to make sure this area of your water that we're going to be working on is completely dry. And I'm going to go ahead and take this white, and I want this white to be quite thin. So I've added quite a bit of water to it. So I wanted to have a little bit of a pink hue. So I just got a little tiny bit of pink and put it in there. And I'm gonna get a little bit of the blue and put it in here. So I did a little bit more blue than pink. And this is, and I put this on a very clean little piece here so that I don't contaminate it with any other colors of paint. And what I'm going to start to do is I'm just going to start to brush this on, and I'm going to go right up to the edge of where my water would be. And then what I'm going to do, now you can take a brush to do this, or you can use a clean finger, and I'm just going to start to blend it in with my finger. And again, you can do a little scumbling, another little scumbling brush, like an old brush that you have, and scumble it across. Just trying to add a little glaze over these areas so you know there's a shadow back there being cast by all of this stuff along the water's edge. But we also want to make sure that we have enough of our watercolor in there, the color of the water, so that we can soften it. And I do like to use my fingers a lot, and I know a lot of people are not comfortable with that, so certainly have another brush on hand. Got a little drip there. We're going to be working on the front of the water anyway, so we'll get that in a minute. And each time I'm going back, I'm dipping in my water, I'm wiping off my finger, dipping in the water, and coming back. So you can be like a kid again and just work on your finger painting. So I'm going to take this little white up to the water's edge, get a little water on my fingers after I wipe my finger off, and soften that. And we're going to add some warmth to the water's edge, just a little slight warmth back there anyway. But I just want to make sure I get enough of this white in to soften what's going on back here. And to make sure we know where the water's edge is. So you're getting your kid on here, your childlike mentality on. And as I move forward now, I'm going to add a little bit of this I'm going to keep this color, and I'm going to add just a drop of my yellow. So I just picked up a little bit of the Naples Yellow and mixed it in there. Get a little bit more white. And this is very watered down still. And I'm going to come in and just start to work that in between some of these areas that I have, that I've just put down. So we want to try to pick up what's in the sky now. There's some clouds up there, and it doesn't have to be the perfect shape, but it's just reflecting some of that sky stuff. And I'm just scumbling it across. And if you want to be exact about it and draw exactly what your clouds are looking like up there, you can, but the water tends to distort things anyway. And you can bring some of it up into the area we just did a little bit. And this gives it a nice warm glow. There's that slight yellow. I'm going to add just a little bit more of that yellow. So I picked up a little more yellow. And I'm going to get a little more white. Mix that together. And I'm just going to keep working that in, keep in little random spots. So our paintings has a lot of the cool colors, like all of the greens and the blues. And that's why now we're trying to add a little bit more warmth. I'm going to get a little bit of blue now. As I'm moving forward, I'm going to start to push some of the blues in, and I don't want to get it too green, so it's just a little bit more blue. Get some water and just start to blend that down a little bit. Back down to the little yellow area. Put that in. So you can see how this little glazing technique helps to create some different sort of forms in the way the light might be hitting on your lake. And I also think in this area I'm going to get a little bit more of my red down here and some white, and maybe even right along in here, blend in some of that red so you can see a little tiny bit of that in the sky. Make sure it's watered down enough, and just maybe work some of that in as well. Make sure your finger's clean, and this is where you can really have fun. This is kind of nice fun stuff here, and you just blend that right in. And if you want, you can just dip your finger right in the paint, get your finger painting techniques going on. And that's the thing about doing this, it's kind of fun to be that 5-year-old again and just getting unafraid. There we go. And I'm going to come back now. I'm going to wipe that off my brush a little bit, get a little bit more blue, because as we're coming down now, I want this area to have more of this top blue color in it. So I'm going to go back into my Pthalo Blue. And again, it's still kind of I still have it watered down quite a bit. And I'm going to scumble that into here. And it's very thin. You can see how thin this is on my palette. And just working that across. And here's where I can go up above these grasses and even into them a little bit to soften those tops of the grasses before you add that final grassy area phase in. And if you see some areas you don't think are blended enough, you can take your fingers and just blend them, or you can take another little blending brush and blend it all in. Have some areas on your canvas that when you were painting where you felt like you didn't get enough of what was happening going on. I'm going to get a little white and water that down and just put that in there. So if you get an area that you think is just too dark, you don't like it, add some white and a little water And just start to work that in. And you want to make sure that you work some of these colors back a little bit so it looks natural, like it's blending in back here with everything else. And I'm going to take my hand, make sure it's clean, and just start to blend that out a little more. Get a little bit of this white along here. And I'm going to come right up to my little grassy areas here. It's always good to take a little step back and peek at it, see what you think, see if there's any areas that are just not looking quite right. And once you have this the way that you like it, we're going to go ahead, and most of the paint is off my brush, and I'm going to come back to my regular palette. So I'm going to switch back to this palette, and I'm going to go ahead and start to put in some of these nice warm colors here. So I'm going to come right down into this Naples Yellow, get a little titanium white over here. And I'm going to add just a drop of my umber to it. And I'm going to bring that color right along where I think there may be some sandy area. So I'm just using the tip of my brush just to wipe that in so I can settle this embankment down a little bit into the water. I'm going to be pulling up some more grasses here in just a little bit. And maybe right along in here, there's a little area of just dirt. I'm just adding some of this warm color in now. And I'm doing that intentionally along here because this is my shadow area. And we're going to be using our smaller brush to pull up some more grassy areas in just a little bit. But I'm just coming along and putting a little bit of that down into these areas and just blending it up there. And I'm just trying to use this to settle down some of my little areas that I want to settle down into the water here. I'm going to take that same paint color. So I've got yellow. I'm going to add a little bit more of my umber to it. Just quite a bit more. And some white. There we go. And I do want to bring in some of that back here. Let's see if that's going to work for me. There we go. So I'm just going to drop this in certain areas back here. So I want to make sure I have a nice area that's, I'm going to add a little red to that, I think. So I'm going to add a little red to create a nice reddish color against all this green back here. There we go. I'm just going to drop that into places. Maybe there's areas that dip in and dip back out that you might can sneak into back there as well in this little cove. So you get to decide, you know, what you want to be your shoreline here. And if you feel uncomfortable with this bigger brush, you can wait till we get to the smaller brush to do this as well. And again, I am blending that down a little bit. I'm going to take some of this color while I have it and just maybe drop it in as well. I like to do that when I have a color that's I've mixed up and it's a little different. I might just drop it in. We're going to work on our tree a little bit more as well, but maybe I'll just hit just a few of these little lines of color there. So I'm going to rinse this out and we're going to come back and we're going to work some more grasses that are more yellow looking in the front here with just our flat brush. So I've wet my flat brush, my 3/4 inch flat brush, And I'm gonna pull up a few little warm grasses. I'm gonna keep this little dark area, but I wanna pull up a few little warmer grasses up in the front here. And I'm also gonna pull up some taller grasses on each side here. And we'll go from there. So I'm going to take some of my yellow ochre, and I'm actually going to mix in some of this Naples yellow with it and some white. So just creating a nice earthy yellow. And I got some of that off my brush. And I'm just going to start to lightly touch in. So I'm just dropping down. So I'm putting my brush down and just lightly, very lightly pulling in some areas. And this is just to start with. It's a very light touch here. And then I'm going to turn as I come here. I'm actually going to turn on the very chisel edge of my brush, and I'm just going to pull up some of these little grassy areas here with this brighter color. And we're going to come back to some more intense greens in just a little bit. And I'm going to come back. I'm going to put some of that over here as well. Not to worry if they look kind of thick, because we're going to come back and get some more of that in there. Now I'm going to take just the corner of my brush and I'm going to drop some of that in here as well. Just dotting with the corner of my brush. And I'm only going to keep that on the outer edges of my tree. I can bring it up to the top and come around to the center. I could bring some over here if I want to. I don't want to bring too many over there. I'm going to take the same color now, and I'm going to bring in a little bit of my blue into that. And mix those together. And I'm going to get a little red so that I can make it a little bit more intense and dark. So what I want to do with this is I'm going to flatten my brush into the paint so I get a nice sharp edge. It's called a chiseled edge on the very tip of the brush. I want to bring this forward so you can see this. So I'm going to start down at the base of my painting. I'm on the chisel edge, and I'm just going to lightly pull up some grasses here. And they can go in all sorts of directions, and that yellow paint still may be a little wet, and that's great because it'll mix right in with that paint that is on my brush, and I'm okay with that. And then I'm going to come back into my palette, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to press into that paint color. So it's my yellow ochre and my Naples yellow with some blue in it. Press down. I'm getting some of that paint too close to my ferrule. I'll press down to get the chisel edge. And then I can come over here and I can do the same thing. I can just pull up some of these grasses. Now I am going to intentionally pull a few of these straight up on purpose. And you'll see why in just a little bit. And then I'm going to go ahead and get some of these kind of leaning in a little. There we go. And you want to make sure that the paint is pretty wet so it flows off your brush quite easily. So that's the key, is if it's too dry, it's not going to come off your brush as easily. Now I want to make it look like it's settled down in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get it to be darker by adding more blue and a little red, so it becomes a little bit more purpley mixed into that color. And I'm going to start by having my brush flat. I just want to settle this down, and I'm going to do my brush flat over here. Now all this paint is still wet, that's okay. We're going to pull up. And I'm not going to pull up as far every time with this because I want to settle this down in there. And I like the way that looks, so I'm going to come over here and do the same thing. So I'm just settling these grasses in, and that purple against the green and the yellows looks really good. And I'm going to go ahead and use the rest of what's on my brush just to kind of mix in here a little bit. We're going to do more with these grasses and just a little bit with our small round brush. But adding that little bit in there with that red also gives it a little character. I may even hit it here. Just kind of makes everything pop out a little bit. So you can start to see when you start adding these warmer colors to the front, how it settles everything back and your eye starts to come more forward here. And if you feel like you want any more grasses up here, you certainly can. We're going to be doing some more grasses and something else. We're going to be adding probably some cattails over here with my small brush. All right, so I like that. I'm going to rinse this brush out, and we're going to go ahead and add our bright highlights with our little small round brush for the next step. So now we have our small round brush, and this is a nice time to step back and look at your painting and see where there are areas that you like and areas that you may want to change a little bit. And also, I'm going to go ahead and sketch in a couple of these little cattails. So I'm going to make a little upside down U and then a little U at the bottom and connect those two where I've got a few of these grasses standing straight up. So I'm going to come and do one maybe right here and here, and then maybe one a little lower here, maybe right here. And I'll fill those in just a little bit. So I'm going to have a few cattails here, and a couple of things that I do like is I like some of these lights and darks here, but I want it to be a little lighter. And then I feel as though this is too straight of a line, so when I'm adding my highlights, I'm going to make sure that I keep that in mind. I am going to draw a little bit more of some water line back here, just a little bit, not all the way across like a straight line, but just a little bit of some white back here as a water line. And you can do any other changes you want. Of course, I want some brighter highlights on my tree as well, so I'm going to start by filling in my little cattails over here. And I'm going to use my umber to do that. So I'm just taking some umber. I'm going to add a little drop of red to that. And then some white to that, and see what that looks like. And that I do like because we're going to be adding some small highlights. So I'm just going to fill in the little cattails here that I just drew in. All right, we're going to let those dry, and we'll come back and I'm going to make it look like they are a little bit more attached down in here in just a little bit. While I have this color of my cattails, I certainly can work to put a few little straight little lines of that color, because it has a nice peachy brown look to it, and I can start to hit that in because it has some of that red in it against the green. It's going to make the green stand out. So here I want my shadow to come across, but I don't want it to be a straight line. So I can start to break that line up. And maybe start to put some of that in there. And I'm going to add a little bit of that to my tree as well. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get that paint off the brush, and I'm going to come into my Naples Yellow. And some white. And here's where I'm going to start to add a bit more, some highlights. I'm going to put a drop, just a little tiny bit. So I did Naples Yellow and white, and I'll put a little red in there. This is going to be a nice color to put into my highlight areas. So I'm going to come over to my tree, and I'm just going to start to hit some of that in areas, and then I'm going to do a little blend so it's not everywhere. But I do want it on the outer edge and maybe into the top of my tree a little bit. And then I can bring some of that color down in here as well, just in little random spots Not everywhere though, and I do like the idea of having some of this color down here as though there's maybe some more of that sandy color around. I think what I may do is I'm going to take just a few little hits of this color back here and make that kind of my nice little, instead of just pure white, just hitting it back here in little spots, not everywhere. So I don't want a nice straight line across. I'm just hitting it back here. Maybe there's some little sandy areas or areas back here. And what I want to do now is I need to get some more greens in my tree over here. So I'm going to keep the same color and I'm going to start to come down into my blue, mix that in, and I'm going to add a little bit of my green. So it becomes a bit of a turquoisey color, and I'm going to start to work that in as well. So if I have any areas on the outside of my tree that I don't like, this is where I can hit some to brighten things up a little bit. And I do like hitting some of those turquoise colors in, and I may even take a little bit of that back in here, just a little bit. These areas, just tiny bit. And I can bring some of that down in here as well if I feel like there's just areas that are just not broken up enough. Maybe work some of those into the dark area just a little bit. And these are just those little tiny highlight details that you can think about doing that can make all the difference in your painting. And I'm going to settle even some of that turquoise down in the front area here. And that just brightens everything up. It brings some of that turquoise color that's back in here, it brings it forward, and it creates a cohesion in your paintings. I'm going to add a little bit more of the red to it to darken it a little more so it becomes a bit more purple, and a bit more of this umber. And I'm going to pull up some of those little dark grasses out here. I'll get those settled down in just a minute. And so the umber mixed in is a little bit more on the orangey side, so it sets well against the blue. And then I'm going to come into my green and throw that in, and then I'm just going to settle that into some of these areas as well. And get a little white into that, mix those together. And these are just little things that help to make your painting your painting. I'm going to get that paint out because I just want to mix some green and blue to go back to the center of my tree. So I'm doing Pthalo Blue, Pthalo Green, maybe a drop of the yellow ochre, and just come in to hit some of that in the center here. And I'm doing that in all little shapes, so you know, if I do up like that, it makes it look as though we're looking at this little tree and there's some depth in there. Even bring some over here just a little bit, and then I can settle that tree down into the grass here and maybe hit a bit more of this color that's darker out here. So we know there's a shadow of that tree, even more so being cast. I'm gonna get a little bit of my yellow, I'm not rinsing my brush off, and I'm gonna bring that out here. There we go. So I mixed a little bit of the Naples Yellow in, just so I can lighten that color a little bit, and bring it out, and then I'm just gonna do Naples Yellow by itself and just hit a few areas here. This is where you get to have a little fun and make it your own. Now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and pull up a few bright yellow grasses up front and then finish out my cattails. So I've got my Naples Yellow, and I'm going to add a little bit of my green to that and some white. I'm going to get some of these bright green grasses pulled up, so with this little brush you can do a little bit of that grass magic here. And then I can take some of that bright green and maybe hit it in the tree there, maybe on this side even, just a little bit, and then come over here. Get a little water on my brush because it's not flowing off my brush, and pull some up here. And here's where I can decide that I've got my little cattail here. Maybe I can pull down a little grass there. A little grass there. I'm gonna add a little bit more yellow to that. I'm gonna add a little, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a little yellow ochre to that. Make it a little bit more of an earthy yellow over here. It's not too bright. Bring that down, bring that down, bring that down. And work some of that out. And I can come back over and do the same thing over here. Settle some of that brightness back of those greens. There we go. I'm going to take some of that blue-green color up here that I mixed with a little bit of the red in it, and I'm going to pull some of those darker colors in down here just to settle this in a little more, and the same over here. Here we go. And you can work to do anything that you like with that. I'm going to get this paint out of my brush and get a little bit of my white and just kind of run it along here, just so I know that I'm really sure that I've got my separation here of my water now that I have this little small brush. There we go. I'm going to come over here to my white and my red and maybe just drop some of that in here as well. So it's just a little light pink color, just dropping it in little spots. And it's nice to set some of this pink against the green, just a little bit. Maybe down in here as well. So here's where you can have fun with your artistic license. You may even put a little bit of that pink color back here. And I'm going to take that pink color and add a little bit of my Naples Yellow to it. I want to create a nice orangey color here. So I can fill in. Now this is the side that I want to be the brightest side on my cattails. You don't need too many. I'm just going to add a few strokes here. And then I can take my pinky and rub it across. There we go. And here, same thing. And I'm just working my brush into the center. So I'm just doing a little light U shape, and I'm barely touching my pinky to the canvas just to blend that in a little more. There's these little stems that poke out the top of my cattail, so I want to make sure I bring my brush to a point and just lightly touch and pull up. Lightly touch and pull up. So I'm just barely touching the point of my brush to the canvas and just lightly pulling up. And if you see any other areas where you want to add a little brightness to, you can do that. Go right outside this little shadow area, maybe touch some there. Maybe touch some between your blades of grass here, just to make your blades of grass look like blades of grass. Maybe even some of this on the outer edge of your tree. You certainly can have fun with that. And again, you can bring some more of it back here if you like. Trying to stay more on the side where I think maybe getting a little hit of light. And you certainly can take a step back and look and see where you are with your painting at any point. Pull up a few more grasses here. Take some of this green color here. This darker green. And bring that from my cattails here. There we go. And then I'm going to take some of the yellow and just pull a little bit more brightness into here. And a little bit more brightness over here. So once you have your painting the way that you like it, this is the quiet cove that you've had dreams about spending some nice quiet time in. You can sign your painting, so I'm going to go ahead And you can do anything that you want with your painting. If you wanted to add something in the water like a boat or some ducks or geese, you can do that. I just wanted this to be a nice, quiet cove. I think I'm gonna do that little light pinkish orange color. I'm gonna sign it in this little corner here. And we're done. Thank you for keeping me company today, and I hope you created something very special for yourself. Until next time, bye-bye.